What can you tell us about this announcement about electrification in Europe for Ford today?
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be on air with you today. So we're here in Amsterdam, and we've been announcing and revealing to the team here 16 new electrified vehicles across the whole range, starting with mild hybrids on our Fiesta, all the way up to a future look at our 2-ton Transit and a full battery electric version of that. So we've had a lot of electrification news across the whole of our product range here today in Amsterdam.
Okay, so give us some facts and figures about this. How large is the investment? Because as you know, Ford back in Detroit has announced a very substantial investment in electrification in Michigan. How large will the investment be from Ford for Europe?
Well, this, what we're announcing today is part of that overall announcement that was made in Michigan of kind of $11 billion worth of electrification. So we've got 16 new products that we've announced today. 8 of them will go on sale by the end of this year. You know, so we've been talking about a full range of plug-in hybrids and self-charging hybrids pretty much across all of the model range. So this really is a substantial play from Ford as we prepare for an electrified future. I know people have been waiting for us to give more news around what the content of electrification has been, and today really is that day where we demonstrate that this is not 1 or 2 vehicles, it's a complete range across the total products from Fiesta up to Transit, as I say.
You've mentioned hybrid a couple of times here. How much of the fleet, go 5 years out, how much of the fleet in Europe will be hybrid as opposed to complete electrified vehicles?
Well, if we think about electrification in total, so that is hybrid and full battery electric, we think that by kind of the middle of the next decade, it'll be 50% of vehicles sold will be electrified to some degree. And we think probably in 2025, something in the order of 20% of the fleet will be full battery electric vehicles. So hybrids will still be a substantial part of new vehicles sold because they offer a level of flexibility and capability to those people that need some electrification but don't, for whatever reason, want to go to a full battery electric vehicle. So we see that mild hybrids, full hybrids and plug-in hybrids are going to be a very important part of the powertrain lineup for many years to come yet.
As various automobile companies around the world move to electrification as well as autonomous vehicles, there's a lot of teaming up, if I can put it that way, going on. And of course, Volkswagen and Ford have been talking about various ways they can work together on both EVs and AVs. How does Volkswagen figure, if at all, into this electrification announcement that you're making today?
The announcements we made today are not a part of the alliance that we're forming with Volkswagen. So these are products that we're going to be producing now before we get into more discussion around the potential for sharing electrification technologies. So with the Volkswagen alliance, thus far we've announced that we will be collaborating on our next generation of commercial vehicles, so our smaller pickup trucks and light commercial vehicles. So the news that we've shared today is not linked to the VW Alliance. It's products that we'll bring to market before we see any benefits of that collaboration with Volkswagen.
There's a great deal of news every day back here in the United States as well as over in Europe involving your business. And let me take 2 specific instances. Brexit, which, as we've already talked to Mr. Hackett, your CEO, said has affected your decision-making in Europe. And also we have the possible trade dispute with the United States and Europe. How does Brexit, how does the possible trade dispute with Europe potentially affect what you will be doing in Europe and specifically with electric vehicles?
Well, Brexit, of course, would, you know, a hard Brexit or a no-deal Brexit would be a disaster, we think, for our industry in the UK, for Ford Motor Companies and the rest of the industry, because we've spent the last 40 years working with a supply chain that can move goods and services freely across the borders with Europe, and so we have a supply chain that is structured specifically to do that. So we've been encouraging both the British government and also the authorities in Brussels to come to an agreement that will allow us to maintain frictionless movement of goods at the border and tariff-free exports and imports, of course, because anything that makes it more difficult to move materials or products around Europe, between the UK and mainland Europe, will limit our ability to continue to invest potentially in the UK. We love our business in the UK. It's an important part of Ford Motor Company in Europe, and we want to continue to have a big business in the UK. But anything that would impact our competitiveness in the UK would cause us to think again about our future footprint and where we'd make our investment. So it is an issue that we take very seriously, and I encourage the UK government to find a way through the current impasse.
And finally, Mr. Armstrong, today you're announcing expansion of Ford in the electric vehicle area over in Europe. At the same time you're expanding, you're also cutting back, because earlier you announced that you're going to be restructuring as part of an overall Ford plan in Europe, which will involve letting go quite a few employees, both in Europe and in the UK. Where are you in that process, and when will we see the effects, particularly on the bottom line for Ford?
Well, we announced last week some of the latest steps in that process. So the restructuring of our business in Russia, where we said we would be exiting the passenger vehicle business and concentrating on our successful commercial vehicle business in Russia. And we also announced last week that we would be ceasing production of the C-Max vehicle in our facility in Saarlouis in Germany. Middle of the year we would be going down from 3 shifts to 2 shifts as we make that adjustment. So you're starting to see some of those actions announced, and we've opened up voluntary separation programs in the UK for our employees and in Germany. So progressively through the balance of this year, and we've said into 2020, you'll see us continue to make those announcements, and it will start to have a positive impact on our bottom line through 2020 and beyond as we complete the restructuring.